Hello, my name is Guy Wallace. I am the author of the PACT Processes for Training and Development, Learning, and Knowledge Management. I'd like to introduce you to the PACT Processes for Training and Development, Learning, and Knowledge Management, and the Enterprise Content Architecture. When I began formal development of what later became the PACT Processes, I intended several things. Number one, to ensure the performance orientation of all instructional content. 2, to move as much instructional content into self-paced means of deployment and out of group-paced means of deployment due to the learner flexibility and control and the lower costs. 3, to modularize the content to increase the sharing of content where appropriate and to allow for unique content, as I saw the trend to generic vanilla content, as too many in the ISD space thought it all had to be shareable. Sharing will increase return on investment by improving the performance impact of the instruction, by increasing modular design reuse of content, which will reduce development time and costs, reduced inventory system costs, reduced administrative system costs, reduced deployment system costs, and reduced maintenance system costs. Many of my larger CAD projects in the mid-1980s, conducted for multiple target audiences, each with their own training and development path, drove me to create an inventory scheme for modules and content so that I could more visibly see the content organized by clusters. I've been using the evolving concept of the module inventory framework since the late 1980s, and now it is the PACT Enterprise Content Architecture, supported by a device I call the WELL. The Enterprise Content Architecture contains all instructional content, from the training and development paths themselves to the training and development events that actually exist and the designs for the gaps in the content, training and development modules that exist and the designs for such, training and development lessons content and the designs of such, training and development instructional activities and the designs for content not yet developed or acquired. And content elements of the WELL include the names and official language for the business units, divisions, functions, and departments of the enterprise, including definitions and descriptions of each, enterprise logos and use restrictions, graphics, photos, pictures, etc. And by WELL, I mean a well-organized, well-resourced source for content element collections for the purposes of enabling reuse. More on that later. Instructional content in the ECA includes information and content to inform, to guide, and or to teach. And because we believe that best practices are intended to be instructional in the first place, and that lessons learned are intended to be instructional in the first place, and that electronic performance support systems or paper job aids are intended to be instructional in the first place, they are all included in the Enterprise Content Architecture. And because blended has always been better, and that there will always be group-paced training and structured on-the-job coached training, besides e-learning, the ECA also contains the masters for participant guides, facilitator guides and presentation materials and exercise materials, and administrative guides for room setup and equipment, etc. The WELL, an ancillary object storage warehouse for raw materials and sub-assemblies, is intended to keep everything from the Training and Development, Learning, and Knowledge Management Department necessary to build instructional content. The WELL is a super-organized, logical, intuitive library of accessible logos, branding imagery, photos, pictures, drawings, graphical elements, graphics, plan examples and templates, report and document templates and examples, presentation templates and examples, all intended to facilitate reuse. The Enterprise Content Architecture stores existing legacy content, which is non-modular, at least per the PACT processes. It also stores PACT modularized content and the designs and data for content not yet built or bought, and stores for access all instructional support materials such as LCD presentations, facilitator guide masters, administrative guide masters, and participant guide masters for printing and sharing. It is intended to be used by pull learners, informal learners on a search for content, push learners who have been directed to this resource to acquire certain content, and for developers and authors for development and maintenance of content. The enterprise content architecture is organized into 5 tiers of content. Perhaps a better metaphor for you would be doors, as in behind door number 1. Well, behind tier number 1 are organizational orientations. Tier 2, performance orientations. Tier 3, enabling knowledge and skills. Tier 4, shared performance how-to content. Tier 5, unique performance how-to content. Tier 1, organizational orientations. The structure follows the enterprise process architecture, an organization scheme for enterprise processes by process-centric functions, or however the enterprise is organized. Content would include orientations to the enterprise, orientations to the business units, orientations to the divisions, orientations to the functions, orientations to the departments, orientation to the jobs, and orientations to the process teams that those jobs would sit on. The types of content would include vision, mission, and values, the organization structure and all personnel, perhaps position performance descriptions, professional bios, photos, etc. An overview of all of the department's processes owned and supported. Product and service access protocols. In other words, how do you do business with us? Did you need to budget for this last year? Or do you bring blue money along with you with your request this time? Contact information. You could have each department be responsible for this content and put this content into web pages, blogs, wikis, and other devices to share the current information with whomever needs it and to help keep it evergreen. Tier 2 content provides advanced organizers for all of the areas of performance defined by the analysis efforts. The structure follows the enterprise process architecture. Each Tier 2 instructional activity would define what the performance is in terms of outputs, tasks, various roles and responsibilities involved, typical performance issues faced by those performing, and a listing of all the enabling knowledge and skills, attributes, values, and perhaps even the environmental assets required to support the performance. All of this is straight from the performance model and knowledge and skill matrices. In fact, I often tell clients that immediately after the analysis phase, we are ready to write certain types of content given what we know the architecture will need to include ultimately. And that can be done before the design efforts. For an example, in a department labeled Training and Development, Learning, and Knowledge Management, we'd find AOP overviews on analysis, on design, and on development and acquisition, which would be part of the processes one would expect to find in an ADDIE-oriented training and development, learning, and knowledge management organization. In the payroll department, we'd find AOPs such as new employee enrollment in the payroll system, or updating employee deductions, or cutting termination payroll checks. Tier 4 content is how to, no kidding, for all of the area performance defined. For every Tier 2 content, there would be an associated Tier 4 or 5 piece of content. Tier 4 covers the how-tos for those areas of performance that are shared with other target audiences. Tier 5 covers the how-tos for all of the area performance defined by the analysis efforts as unique to the target audience. When we refer to the how-to content, we often add a phrase afterwards for emphasis. How to, no kidding. The structure for the Tier 4 and 5 content would follow the same structure of the Tier 2 content, which is informed by the analysis efforts areas of performance. Tier 3 content, the enabling knowledge and skills. This follows the analysis efforts 17 categories of knowledge and skills. They include, number 1, company policies, procedures, practices, and guidelines. Category 2, laws, regulations, codes, agreements, and contracts. 3, industry standards. 4, internal organizations and resources. 5, external organizations and resources. 6, marketplace knowledge. 7, product and service knowledge. 8, process knowledge. 9, records, reports, documents, and forms. 10, materials and supplies. 11, tools, equipment, and machinery. 12, computer systems, software, and hardware. 13, personal and interpersonal skills. 14, management and supervisory skills. 15, business knowledge and skills. 16, professional and technical knowledge and skills. 17, functional specific skills. The content in each one of these categories would include the enabling knowledge and skills covered in information instructional activities, demonstration instructional activities, and application instructional activities at the awareness, knowledge, or skills level. Think of the new to the company or new to the job learner progressing up the learning curve by going down the training and development path. First, getting a bunch of Tier 1 content and appropriately getting oriented to the enterprise, the business unit, the division, the function, and the department that they're in. Plus, getting an orientation to their job and the performance requirements, a high-level overview of these areas of performance, and then being oriented to the various process teams that they may be a part of in conducting the process performance for those processes that their department owns and for the processes that the department supports, owned by others. Next, they'd get a bunch of advanced organizers going deeper into each one of the areas of performance that are part of their job. They would understand the outputs, the tasks, the roles and responsibilities, who else is involved, what are the typical struggles, and what is it that you need to know, and other attributes and values that are important to the performance. Now that the learner knows what the job process performance responsibilities include, they're ready to address the prerequisites, the Tier 3 content, enabling knowledge and skills. Tier 3 content bridges the Tier 2 overviews, advanced organizers, and the how-tos of Tier 4 and 5. After the appropriate Tier 3 content is taken, it is followed by the appropriate Tier 4 and 5 how-tos, shared by different target audiences or unique to one target audience, or core to every last target audience in the enterprise. Imagine that we've overviewed the sales bid process in Tier 2 and have taken some prerequisite content regarding external laws, internal policies and procedures, our unique sales bid process, and some unique computer tools from Tier 3. The learner is now ready for the Tier 4 or 5 content on how to, which puts it all together for a specific process performance. So what's the deal between Tier 4 and 5? Why differentiate? Aren't how-tos all alike? No. Tier 4 content is inherently more difficult to develop than Tier 5. 2 hours of content that is unique to one target audience, all other things being equal, is easier to develop because it only is dealing with one target audience and not multiple. Content for multiple target audiences, such as Tier 4, requires careful selection of examples and application exercises, or multiple examples and application exercises so that they are meaningful, have fidelity, etc. I differentiate Tier 4 and Tier 5 for the ISD suppliers in this process, not necessarily for the customers. Tagging a chunk of content as a Tier 4 is a signal for everyone. Of course, it depends on how much sharing is expected. Is it across 3 target audiences or 25? The only thing worse is to find out that it isn't unique or just shared. It is core for everyone. The well is content not for distribution to the enterprise as a whole. It is a repository for the developers and authors providing guidance, tools, templates, content building block items such as pictures, photos, biographies, approved text from the legal organization, various descriptions of the enterprise, the market served, the customers served, the products and services offered, tools and templates for plans, reports, documents, and examples for those plans, reports, and documents. Tagging content in the PACT processes happens before SCORM tagging. In PACT, tagging happens in Phase 3, the design phase of both MCD and IAD, by assigning a logical ECA number to that chunk of content. In the case of PACT, it is the instructional activity that gets tagged. For SCORM, tagging happens in the Phase 4, development and acquisition phases of MCD and IAD, using your authoring tools, your LCMS, etc. In summary, the PACT process enterprise content architecture is an electronic storage warehouse for learning and performance content. The well is a well-organized resource, an electronic warehouse for smaller content objects and components, not quite learning objects, all intended to increase reuse of existing content. You can learn more about the PACT processes in my book, Lean ISD, offered as a free PDF, 404 pages. It's on my website at www.eppic.biz. That's epic with 2 P's, .biz. And you can reach me, Guy Wallace, through my website as well. I hope that you have found this informational. Thank you, and have a great day.